This black screen represents what most people get wrong about history. Okay, let me explain. In the X-Files, Agent Mulder claims that the truth is out there. But is the truth out there? The truth of the past? A lot of people say yes, and it's their truth. They have the answer. They alone can judge people and events of the past, whilst also being uniquely qualified to interpret and contextualize said events in the correct way. You may have even seen or heard this in action. Famous historical figure gets cancelled and institutions of the past are now evil incarnate. In short, these people project their present onto the past, and anyone who disagrees or draws different conclusions has a bias or an agenda, or is part of the problem, or is ignoring the evidence. Mr. Historyologist, are you so bold to say that people can't interpret history according to their own perspective? No, I'm not bold. I'm a coward. What I'm saying is people are conflating their own perspective with the objective truth. For example, we might say that Winston Churchill was a racist and therefore bad and therefore not worthy of respect. Now, when someone points out all the amazing things that he did and his efforts and leadership in fighting the Nazis, that person is giving tacit approval to racism or simply too dumb to see the truth. Here's the thing. History doesn't deal in objective truth. It deals in what is likely to be true. Take a second to consider the historical process. Not the work of historians, but the process in which historical material gets passed down to us. First, something happens. Let's call it event A. From that, there are a few different possibilities. Number one, someone witnesses event A and writes an account, either shortly after or sometimes years after. This would include diaries and journals, private letters, written accounts, etc. This is called an eyewitness account. B, someone hears about event A from someone else and writes it down. This is called secondhand information. A friend of a friend told me. C, someone reads someone else's account of event A or views records relating to event A, which may or may not be from an eyewitness, and then writes it down. D, someone hears oral traditions or stories relating to event A and writes it down. Usually this would be local myths or legends from a pre-literate society. Or E, someone sees or hears some sort of audio-visual display and writes it down. Note that these are not mutually exclusive. Most accounts or histories would use a blend of all of these processes and draw on many different sources. That is history in a nutshell. An event happens and someone writes it down. I will now go through each in more detail. Eyewitness. These include things like diaries, journals, memoirs, letters, and personal accounts. Things like Julius Caesar's Gallic War commentaries, or some of Winston Churchill's writings, or maybe even just someone who witnessed the effects of a plague in their city. Eyewitness is generally viewed as more credible because they claim to have seen the event. But here's the thing. How well do you remember your life? Seriously, do you have a memory of 10 a.m. last Thursday? Now, I know that's a trivial time, but what about something important, like your wedding, or a birthday, or a death in the family? How well do you remember that? Do you remember the whole thing fully, or do you remember some things and fill in the rest with a story? Now, I'm no neuroscientist, I'm a historyologist, but from what I understand, human memory is demonstrably less than perfect, verging on unreliable. There's a reason why testimony is the lowest form of evidence in law courts. In addition, we cannot help but see the world from our own perspective. A Roman aristocrat will interpret events and perhaps even remember them differently to someone born on the streets, and each would be justified in believing their version over another. Another aspect, and this virtually applies to all of history, is that people write accounts for a reason. Sometimes that's to try and record accurate information. Sometimes it's to try and cast themselves or their group in a certain way. Other times it's to try and convince you of a point of view. Again, Julius Caesar's Gallic War account was once seen as the objective truth because Caesar said it. But now many historians see it as a propaganda piece serving to justify Caesar's illegal conflict to the Roman people. So, Historyologist, you crazy bastard. Does this mean eyewitness accounts are useless? Well, not really, but more on that later. Next is secondhand information. This is the friend of a friend scenario. The author is recording what they were told without having seen it or experienced it directly. All of the problems from eyewitness accounts are made worse here. A source provides information and then the author, if they find it credible, they will include it in their history or in their story. Accounts, records, libraries. An author will look at records or in accounts, like those in royal libraries, like the Library of Alexandria, or something like ledger books in more modern times. Sometimes these records will be from centuries in the past. For example, the existing histories we have of Alexander the Great are written several centuries after his death, but they're supposedly based on eyewitness accounts, which are lost to us now. And one such account by Ptolemy Soter, who was a friend and general of Alexander, is often quoted in these works. Oral tradition. I suppose this would be a subcategory of secondhand information. Oral traditions are usually from pre-literate societies or parts of a society that is illiterate. Not everyone in ancient Egypt could read and write. Ancient tales like the Epic of Gilgamesh or the Iliad, many historians think that they were oral traditions before they got written down. To what extent these traditions preserve the truth is unclear and very much on a case-by-case basis. Audiovisual. In a sense, having access to these type of technologies has helped solve a lot of the issues we've covered, mainly because raw video or audio footage is without bias and, importantly, without the author's language. Have you ever thought about how imprecise language is? You might have a very clear idea that you're trying to convey, but the language just seems inadequate, especially with ideas or feelings or something not quite tangible. Now throw translations between languages into the mix, or decoding and translating a dead language like Akkadian. Raw audio-visual footage can reduce all of this by showing events as they were. So, Historyologist, it sounds like you're saying that history cannot give us accurate information about the past. Well, yes and no. This brings us back to the black screen. It's actually an image representing the true events of the past. Each piece of historical information we get sheds light on a small section of the image. The further in the past we look, the less historical material we have, and the less illuminated the image is. The closer to the present, the greater the historical material and the greater the illumination. But no matter how much material we have, the image will never and can never be fully illuminated. Why is that? Imagine someone were to summarize your life in 2 pages. Do you think they could completely capture what it is to be you, your triumphs and defeats, the factors that guide your decision making? What if it was 1 page per week of your life, 1 page per day of your life? They still probably couldn't capture you. And in history, we're constantly dealing with this problem. We have 3-dimensional real people that have been translated to 2 dimensions on the page. The story, just like our lives, is always more complicated than it appears on the page. So then it becomes the job of historians, and anyone who cares to try, to piece together the scattered historical information and fill in as much of the image as they can. They do not and cannot say for certain what the image looks like, only what it probably looks like, or what it is likely to look like, which is not always clear and not always agreed upon. To use Alexander the Great as an example, how do we know he existed and that he did the things he did? There's no eyewitness accounts that survive, and the earliest surviving account is from the 1st century BC. However, many of these existing accounts cite and reference earlier works that were first-hand. There's also a mountain of archaeological evidence, stone inscriptions, statues, coins, and they all date to Alexander's lifetime. So historians can say with near certainty that Alexander existed. He was the king of Macedon and he conquered the Persian Empire. It's in the details that things get a bit murkier. Did Alexander assassinate his father to gain power? Did he really throw a spear into a beach in Turkey, claiming the whole of Asia for himself? What were his motivations? How did he die? All of these questions and events can't be answered with the truth. They can only be answered with probabilities or likelihoods. So what then is the value of history? Why is it important? Or why do people get it wrong? History is story time. Stories about us. How did we become who we are? And from those stories, we can extract information about the past, about what it was like, what people went through. It's similar to when an artist makes a painting. The painting is there in and of itself. From that, we can get information about that artist. And history is the same. So when people look at history and they try and find an objective truth, they can really only do that by pushing their own agenda onto the past. There's something that they need to be true or that they want to be true. And by doing that, they're missing the whole point of the exercise. And remember, even if it's not true, you have to believe in history.